full with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. I'll note that all board members are present here this morning, and I will move to approve the minutes from our November 21st, 2022 board meeting. There's a second.
Second.
Thank you. Any question or comment? Okay, hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. And now on to the, well, I'll move, just to get discussion going, but move for the acknowledgement of municipal ward boundaries and corresponding precinct boundaries for Bay Village, Berea, Brook Park, Fairview Park, Garfield Heights, and Parma. There's a second.
Second.
Mr. Pilati, could you, or you have,
Sure.
you or staff have someone to?
No,
Mr.
John,
Reddy.
John will come up. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to kick this off. So,
Morning, John.
based on the decennial census, Ohio Revised Code for those cities or those communities that are statutory cities have, or to look at their population and go ahead and rebalance wards on population and even that out. We have 6 communities in Cuyahoga County that are statutory. The rest of them are charter communities. In the charter communities, if they're charter, if they have a provision that speaks to the same concept of looking at population and then adjusting ward lines to even out and try to get the wards to be as equal as possible population, the city council is tasked with looking at that, engaging in whatever processes they do, if they bring in third-party map makers or whatever it is, and they come up with what their ward boundary lines would be. It is municipalities that are responsible for drawing ward boundaries, where the Board of Elections is responsible for the precincts that are contained within. So the census from 2020, the results came out, and because of the timing of when we got those results, we were not able to implement any changes in legislation that came forward at the top of 2022, and that was with all the redistricting that was going on. And there's other rules that you can only change precinct boundaries within a certain amount of calendar days before an election. So the goal was to try to do some of this boundary ward work in the summer of 22. And then we were blessed with another statewide primary election in August that was not planned for. But again, put in now these boundary or these proximity to election that did not make it possible. So we knew then that we were going to have to wait till after November, in which we're at this point now where we have 6 communities today that we want to talk about. We have more communities that have provided us with some legal descriptions. However, those communities don't have a filing deadline for election until August or later. So we focused on things that have a candidate filing deadline of June or sooner to get these up and changed. So we have received from Bay Village, Berea, Brook Park, Fairview Park, Garfield Heights, and Parma legislation passed by their city council for their ward boundaries. John has looked at these ward boundaries. We've had bipartisan teams of employees proof the legal description and legislation provided by the municipalities against a map that John has drawn to ensure that it's following streets and census blocks and parcels as defined in the legislation. So these maps here, we know that the legislation provided by the municipalities, we were able to draw a good map. So then John goes ahead and he draws his precincts. In the precincts, we have some rules that are defined in Ohio Revised Code. You can't have a precinct that has more than 1,400 voters in it. We don't go across ward lines, so a precinct is contained within one ward. And then we also look at some of the different splits that you could have. And so United States Congress, Ohio Legislature, school boards can have their boundaries that may go through a precinct. So John also looks at those to try to minimize the amount of split precincts in that, meaning that everyone in that precinct would hopefully have a ballot that contains all the same offices. Can't always eliminate those, but we try to minimize those instead of growing those. And then I did mention that 1,400 is the maximum in statute for a precinct. We don't try to go to that maximum. We try to go about 250 less, so which is 1,150 as a goal or a target where we try to put our precincts together. And precincts are cobbled together by looking at census blocks. And that's how we kind of John makes these boundaries. We do that 1150 to allow for population shifts. So if all of a sudden a senior living facility is built in a neighborhood or apartments or a housing development, we're not at, or hopefully not at that maximum where we're now in a scramble situation to go ahead and change precinct lines. So John does all this, and it's quite a puzzle that he does, and he works and he also tries to get these precincts so they look as much as a normal shape you would see, like a square or a rectangle, as possible, versus it being an octopus with different things shooting all over the place. So he does all that to try to make it work. And this is, so what we have now are these maps. As part of our process, then we've provided as a courtesy the maps to the municipalities involved. We emailed it to the mayor's office, the clerk of council, for them to take a look, and has that clerk to go ahead and disseminate it out to the council body. And if they had comments, to go ahead and let us know, and we would take those in advisement if it was something that we could adjust or not. And so Brent Waller communicated with all the council clerks, and they didn't have comments, but then Tony and I followed up. We split and we called the communities to make sure that the clerks and the elected officials understood what was going on. And so people that we spoke with, we communicated on, like in Parma, I was able to communicate with the president of council, Mayor DeGeeter, the clerk, Garfield Heights. The president of council and the mayor didn't feel a need to call me back, but this past week at their council meeting, they discussed them and they were fine with those maps. And so they tasked the clerk to communicate with me and had that. So they were good. Brook Park, did not get a call back from the mayor, but I did communicate with council president Vecchio, who was pleased, and the council were happy with the maps. Bay Village, actually, they weren't required to, but they did take up an action at a board meeting saying that they acknowledged and accepted those lines. And Tony, he spoke with Fairview and Berea, and I think it was a similar situation. So
similar situation that they actually acknowledged in a resolution.
He acknowledged that he received it for.
Oh, okay.
But some municipalities did.
So Bay Village was the only body that took an action in a public meeting, but the other, like Garfield, had discussion, conversation in the public meeting. So, so there's, you never know what could happen, but at least at this point in time, with the conversations that we've had, the communications we would have, the elected officials in these communities are accepting of the work that was done. So, so that's kind of a little bit of process and how we do things. We were going to go briefly through each city, but before we do that, if there's any leading questions for myself or John or Tony.
I just have a question. So when, in your discussions with the leadership in each municipality, did you actually tell them the number of voters impacted by the changes? Because that would seem to me to be the most critical thing. I mean, the intricacies of how John draws the boundaries and all that, but did you discuss that with them? Because the only one, I mean, one of the communities, I forget which one, didn't have that many voters impacted compared to the others. The others were like 5,000, 5,600.
Right.
So you talked to them about that, and
so there was a little bit of conversation, but what they did get email from us was I sent an email with a narrative in the email, and then we attached 3 things, and that's what's in your board book.
okay,
They got what I'll call the municipal overview,
okay,
and
great.
then their maps as they were, and the maps as taking down their legislation, applying the wards, and then us having to react, changing the precincts.
Okay.
So they had all those
All right, wonderful.
things there. Okay.
Thank you.
All right, so we'll just start alphabetically. Bay Village. Bay Village started with 12 precincts and maintains 12 precincts in there. They have made some shifts. Theirs were, I would say, a little bit more maybe minor than compared to some of the other municipalities. It does impact just under 1,000 voters. Oh, and by the way, what we will do is, once we get approval, if we get approval today, now we have to go into DIMS and we have to go into the database and make all these changes as far as assigning these precincts, or these lines, how they are presented on these maps, and make it happen in DIMS. So if you were to go in and look up yourself or your street address, you would get the correct precinct as well as the inventory of districts that you vote on there. So once we get all those things done, then we will send out letters to all the individuals that are impacted saying, hey, you've had this precinct change, and make them aware of it. And if it also results in a poll place change, we will make them aware of that too. The goal is not to reduce any poll places, keep the same number, but because of how some of these things change, some people will move from one poll place to another.
In that letter to the voters, will there be a little bit of a summary about why this
Yes.
is happening? Okay, because, so they won't willy-nilly think we just like to make it interesting for them.
Oh, no,
Keep
no, no.
changing it.
Exactly. It's going to say that,
Okay.
your municipality will modify the ward lines pursuant to the charter or statute, depending on what the city is.
Right,
And the Board of Elections then needs to make some
Thank you.
modifications to accommodate those municipal changes. Because really, we are reacting
Yeah.
to what they're doing.
okay, great.
So Bay Village, that's, we have those changes. They just theirs was more, I think, kind of scooting things and left to right, again, trying to get things balanced. And, I don't know if there's there are no split precincts in Bay. I don't know if there's any questions on Bay or if there's any more detail you want.
Well, that's fine. I mean, I appreciate knowing procedurally, the notification is a big deal, as Ina Joe points out, so no one is surprised. And especially when you get down to the next level, letting them know why we're doing this. I'm interested, John, thank you for your work. Could you just briefly tell me, the board, kind of the technicalities that you had to go through briefly? And I think I just noticed maybe there are 2 cities that have split precincts. Is that correct?
Of this group, yeah, Garfield Heights and Fairview Park.
Okay.
Each have, school districts.
And so just kind of briefly tell us what you do procedurally, how you kind of do the map and what.
Well, I have a powerful tool, which is, powerful mapping software called, Geographical Information Systems. And it's overlaying, it's a 3D puzzle, one layer on top of another. Primarily, we're trying to minimize the number of offices in each precinct, make them homogeneous so they're all the same. So we avoid the splits, and we make sure everybody in that precinct has the same district inventory. And the tools that I have allow me to analyze and present and view the maps that you have. The tools are also enable me to update rows and check for changes, and also make sure that they're correspond to the census blocks. It helps me identify situations where we might be, splitting a census blocks. And most of I try to go for regular shapes. I try to focus on to keep the neighborhoods intact and try to keep everybody on the same street in the same precinct. And but sometimes the weird shapes you get are dictated by the geography.
So when you're referring to a split, you're referring to splitting a census block.
No, yeah, don't be confused by that. A split in a precinct might happen for Garfield Heights 3A, for example. Just a small portion of Garfield Heights is in the Cleveland School District. It's 25 voters. It's not the same as you might have a large census block that's geographically extended in shape. Sometimes you might have to split that census block, of which we try to avoid that, but we'll send a waiver and let the state know, and they'll adjust. They have a program where they'll then adjust the census blocks. It kind of filters up.
Right around the Cranwood School, somewhere. around the Cranwood School.
Okay, so there's splits over there by Cranwood School. There's not a split per se. We don't treat it as a split, but I think it's one Garfield Heights 1C and 1D, they're not split precincts, but they're in a different school district. So that's why if you look at the northern part of Garfield Heights, why they might be smaller, because we're kind of bound by those lines. But then on the other end of Garfield Heights, the northwest corner, you have 3A, it's just tucked off by itself. And it ends up as a split.
So I guess when you refer to a split, are you referring to different municipal jurisdictions that
Right.
you're splitting up as opposed to census tracts?
Right. Yes, yeah. A split precinct is just not to be confused with a split census block.
I see. So I could have Representative A representing half my precinct and Representative B the other half. That would be a split
That's right.
precinct.
You have, right. So for example, Garfield Heights, Ward 3, you have the people that live in Garfield Heights School District will vote for issues pertaining to Garfield Heights schools and accept everybody but the people on portion 0.02, 3A.02 will vote for Cleveland.
Cleveland, I see. Okay, gotcha. And that has, I know it occurs in many cities, but in this case, the 6 we're looking at, it's just occurred in 2 cities, Berea and Garfield Heights.
And it's just too small of a population to make its own precinct. And if you look at, I think Rocky River is included in these.
No, Rocky River.
Oh, Rocky River. Oh, Fairview Park.
No.
Fairview Park is a very small precinct, 2A, that is in the Rocky River School District. So that one, you know, that's a situation where, just like Garfield Heights, but it has enough population in there. While it's not optimum, you know, voter population that, you know, our ideal of 1,150, at least we avoid a split there.
I'm confused.
Yeah.
So between the Fairview Park split and then the Garfield Heights split relative to the school district.
So let's start with Fairview Park, if that's okay. So Fairview Park, if we go into Ward 2, I'll let you get to that map. So Fairview Park Ward 2 is in a shade of orange. And we have 3 precincts, 2A, 2B, and 2C. Now, none of these are split precinct. However, Garfield Heights, I'm sorry, Fairview Park precinct 2A, there's 258 voters.
Right.
And those 258 voters belong to a different school district. So it's not a split because the entirety of the precinct is assigned to a different school district than, say, those individuals who live in precinct 2B and 2C, they're voting on a different school district. But John is able to draw this line. So if John were to create a split precinct, in this scenario, he could eliminate 2A and say, for example, put half the voters in 2C and half the voters in 2B. And so then you would eliminate all of 2A. But then what would happen is we would generate a split, and he would have to draw this same line here. And then those people would then you'd have 2 ballots, because now you would have, for example, 2C.01 and 2C.02. So that's kind of like.
So you had that split occurred in Fairview previously. It's always
It's
existed.
not technically a split in
Yeah.
2A, it's just, we've always had that, we're not.
It's not, nothing's changed.
Nothing's
Fairview, the Berea School District had always, or Rocky River School District,
Right.
has always been a part of
Right.
Fairview Park.
Right.
And then most of these things we call splits, a result of school district kind of,
Most of
Issues.
them, it's happened with, it has happened with congressional district lines.
In the Ohio House Legislative.
And yeah, they arise. Sometimes at one time we had Ohio House district splits.
we don't cause the split, it's
No.
just given to us because of what the school districts do or the congressional districts do. We just manage
We just
them.
manage them, that's right.
And I guess too, just a little bit more information, like on the Fairview scenario. So everyone who's in 2A, they will all get the same ballot, no matter what. And 2C gets their own, and 2B. If you flip over to Garfield, and we go over to Ward 3 in Garfield, you have on the upper left side of the map, you have 3A.01, and then you have 3A.02. Now, 3A.02 has just 25 voters. So if John applied the same logic as he had done in Fairview, he could have made, for example, a 3A, a 3B, and for example, 3A02 could have been 3C. But then you would only have 25 voters. And so we're not creating a precinct of that. So what he does is he has 3A, so this is, I guess, a true split in that if you live in 3A01, your ballot is a little bit different than 3A02. And let's say that we were in a municipal year. So both 3A01 and 3A02, they would have the same mayor, they would have the same ward council person on there. However, 3A01 would have Garfield Heights School District on their ballot, and 3A02 would have Cleveland Municipal on theirs. So we have to create two different ballots. Everybody goes to the same poll place, but that is carved out for there. And so this is a true split where Fairview, we would have a separate ballot, so you're not worried about giving the wrong ballot to the wrong person. Here in the split, you got to make sure, because all the voters were assigned to 3A, and the split isn't always active. It's only active when that school district's on the ballot. If schools aren't on the ballot, then it's an inactive split, and everybody's ballot looks the same. It's a little bit tricky to, I hope we're kind of explaining it correctly, but that's kind of how.
Can you talk about the Fairview Park Ward 5 issue? Because that seems to be where the split is. And
Are you talking about 5B?
yeah, 5,
Okay,
because I get Ward 2 precincts didn't change.
right, that,
Yeah,
it's funny that came up, through, analyzing this. We're gonna have to account for 5B.02 because that is land that's in the Berea School District, that's in Fairview Park. And previously, we never had that in because it was a building that belonged to NASA. Well, last month, they opened up a new apartment building. So there's people moving in and registering to vote there. So we're gonna have to account for that.
is that what generated the split?
The new split, right?
Okay.
This kind of came up for as we were doing that. In
So
fact, right in
a
the middle.
little anomaly, so not a school district related issue.
There will be a school.
No,
district.
Oh, okay, oh, I see it is,
Berea,
okay, it is, the Berea, Fairview, Berea, okay. Okay,
Any other questions for Mr. Eddy or Mr. Pilati?
No, I just want to point out, and you could, I don't know what the number is, you could probably count on one hand, and probably on just a few fingers, the number of boards of elections in this state that actually have a full-time GS guy on staff that utilize county resources. And we're just blessed to have this guy on our staff, and he is, he goes above and beyond, and he's just a team player and really good. So we're fortunate.
I hope I hope you look at the map sometimes online. I hope you find them useful.
Yeah, and generally, it's every other year that you get busy with this. This year, and then the municipal off year in 2 years.
Right around now. There's always something that comes.
Something right.
yeah.
Keep me busy.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Are there any
thank you.
questions for Mr.? I don't know that we need to go. I mean, I think we've asked the questions for
Sure.
the cities. We've all looked at the data. Everybody's been notified. Any other questions for Mr. Eddy or Mr. Pilati? Okay, we have
Thanks for the work.
I have a question. Is
Please.
this due to the census?
Yes,
So it's a 10,
yeah,
pops up for sure around 10 years.
yeah. So we would see this again, right, in 2030.
We
Unless
don't
we're still
have
working
any
here.
cities that are counting their own people.
No, so but what we will have is, so this is what we're doing now. We will come back again. And depending on, we're looking at filing deadlines. So this was the first focus. If we have time, you may see some more of these trickling in as we go. For other jurisdictions that have, not all 59 modify their boundaries, but there are other ones, like, for example, Parma Heights, we know Euclid, North Olmsted, Westlake. We probably will have some changes that will come along, and the big one will be Cleveland. We don't know when Cleveland's gonna do theirs, and Cleveland's will be just a massive undertaking, because I don't know what's gonna happen if they're going to maintain at 17 wards, or if the population will dictate them going down to 15. So we will wait and see.
Any other questions? Okay, there's a motion pending. All in favor of these? Oh, please, go ahead.
Is there a timeline objections to these maps? Or you consider it done
That's a
now?
good question.
You like speaking out for holding peace?
On these map, as far as the board is concerned,
Yeah, for these communities.
Or the cities.
Oh,
maybe,
so-
just to
Yeah.
understand that.
the cities, again, we reached out to them, we communicated with them. So we're gonna go ahead and move forward now. Now, I would say typically what happens is with ward boundary adjustments, the fighting, I'm not gonna say fighting, the discussion happens around the ward boundary. And council people saying, I want that housing development in my ward, I want the street in my ward. So that's where it gets a little bit more contentious on the actual ward boundaries, which we just receive and accept. What we do with inside of them, typically the cities are like, okay, that's fine. Because it's not impacting those ward boundaries. The ward boundaries where you probably get into some interesting discussions on how that's gonna work.
I mean, I've recalled too, from my experiences, when we do send out the notifications, that's the next step here. You may get some council, people will contact their councilman will contact us and say what's going on. And we're like, I'm sure you've documented all this, what we've done.
Yes.
Because we want to be able to say we've done, and there'll be a discussion. And then it, we generally don't change things. We also get this when we change voting locations. You often reach out to the council to make sure they're aware of those changes.
Yeah, and actually we try to get their support and have them help us find the locations. Definitely.
So good question, Terry. I appreciate it. Any other questions for the, Mr. Pilati? Okay, hearing none, all those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Thank you, John, for all your hard work, and staff too, for your efforts. I will acknowledge the resignation from an appointment to elected office. That is Ms. Esposito resigning from the Bentleyville Village Council, and the appointment to elected office of Lisa Whitmer, Bentleyville Village Council, and Timothy Sturkle, South Euclid Municipal Judge. If there's a second.
Second.
Thank you. Any question or comment? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Good morning, Steve. You're up. Good morning. We see you have an early in-person voting PO performance report for us.
Yes. And, well, as the report and the review indicate, the EIP voting went smoothly and we have a solid team. Several of our temporary employees have been with us probably 10, 12 elections, so it's kind of nice. I just wanted to highlight a couple things from the report. Well, we had 20,185 voters. That included 261 takeaways where the voter is issued a ballot and they could take the ballot with them and return it and cast it later using the vote by mail like envelopes. And of those 261, 99 were actually curbside voters that came down. They dropped the ballot in the box outside. In section 1B, there's a mention of we had a power outage near the end of the voting day. We had about 40 people in line, and it was a little shocking at first, but we have, the main reason I put this in here is to point out that we do have contingencies and we have plans, and we plan for these kind of things. And luckily, the generator kicked on immediately within 30 seconds, maybe. We had power, but our DIMS network was down for a little bit, just waiting for that to come on, and then we were back up and running in less than 10 minutes probably. However, if that did not happen, we did have a backup plan for that, where we can look up the voter and find other ways to issue ballots without using DIMS, and then going back and putting them in the system later. I just want to point out the section 3, the provisional voters section. We did quite a few, 1,146, which represents about 13.5% of all provisional voters throughout the whole election, including election day, which is a significant jump because just regular voting, we would do about 5% of the whole. EIP would represent about 5% of the whole regular voting. So that was just a little anomaly. I thought I'd point that out. And then our other, I'd like to point out, election day. It's, early in-person voting has ended, but we are still pretty busy. And we've decided to try to keep track of that as best we can, of what people are doing when they come into the building. And as I indicated, we had 485 voters that were checked in as active, and they were instructed where to go to vote on that day at their polling locations. And we did actually have 259 provisional voters who could vote here because there was some issue with their registration. They had moved, name change, something else that just wasn't showing up, and we could issue them a ballot that day. We also had some people that came in with 7 people with absentee issues, 2 of which were people who had mistakes on their vote by mail ballot, and we were able to issue them a new ballot and they could vote that. We also had some folks that came in that thought they could vote here, yet they live in Lake County, so we got them where to go.
Steve, and I experienced this when I was collecting ballots. People on election day up front, a lot of them just come down thinking they can vote. Is that what it is basically? And then you have to explain to them that you can't vote here, or?
Yeah, I think we're victim of our own success because people really like to come down here and vote, and they're not thinking, oh, but not on election day.
Right.
I guess. I mean,
Yeah, I guess there's no better way to resolve that other than try to continue to educate people to go online and look up to where they're supposed to go.
And we actually, because I know Joe has, as others behind, definitely has hit on this in the past, we put more effort this time into trying to educate, even on the Monday before, talking with the media and putting things out there, social media and all those things, honing in on this, go to your thing. And we still, you had over 400 people come down here. So we will continue to message that. But we put more effort into it than we had in the past. So hopefully, what 400 is a big number. Maybe we did cut it down.
Oh, sure. And you have 259 provisional voters you were able to accommodate and absentees. So it's obviously you're helping people. I mean, I don't think you'll ever be. It's kind of like the unemployment figure. It's always going to be 3%. You're always going to have a percentage of people just showing up regardless. So anyways, very, very good. I mean, it's really appreciate all your efforts and the success you have, and you and your staff doing heading up that early in-person voting. Any questions? Any more questions for Steve?
No.
All right, thank you, Steve. I will move to just acknowledge the early in-person voting PO performance report for the November 8th, 2022 general election. If there's a second. Thank you. Any question or comment? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Ms. Walker, good morning. I will move to approve the voucher set forth on the agenda, though I have some questions. If there's a second.
Second.
Great. Ms. Walker, I thank you. The $580K for Midwest Direct, that's a board contracted amount and something we budgeted for, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And that's what we expected to pay them.
Actually, less. We budgeted a little bit more, and it came in less than what we expected.
Okay, terrific. And in general, how did Midwest perform for us?
I think Midwest, they performed well. I mean, they, election day ballots, they delivered, they're on a rotating schedule getting them here. I think they were actually maybe a little bit ahead of schedule, and they did well with that. As far as the vote by mail, we had a very large number at the start because the Secretary of State sends out the applications in an even year. So which we like to have that front ended, and they were able to not get them all out on day one, which we expected, but by the end of the week, everything of that big push was out. Seems like stubs worked and all those things. And I would say that Midwest did well in that we anticipated a 2-page ballot, and probably almost a third of the county was a 3-page ballot. So that's a lot of additional printing. And it just takes more time to go ahead and print all of that. So they did, put in their effort and the resources to accommodate same number of voters getting ballots, but the amount of production that they have to do is substantially more. So I was happy with, we were happy with what they did.
Thank you. And I have one other question, Ms. Walker, concerning the, if you can provide, or somebody can provide a few examples of table one ancillary items for the early in-person voting. What sort of product do we buy?
So, okay, so the one, the funding is where we had talked about a month or two ago about asking for additional appropriation from council. So this is part of that. This here is, these are new laptops for Steve and his group to use when they're checking in. That they work off of the laptops in the early in-person voting room. We are purchasing 44 of them because that would be, while we didn't have 44 stations open, we are planning, coming presidential, we probably would have all those open. And the laptops that we have are older and dated and really about to come out of compliance with Secretary of State requirements as far as the operating system and the cybersecurity needs that we're able to have. So we're taking this opportunity to purchase those laptops as well as a mouse for them. People don't like using a trackpad, one of those, and then some scanners. And the scanners those will pair up with the ballot on demand functionality that we will move to with our new voting equipment for the early in person. So instead of having thousands of ballots on a wall, we will have some there in a backup scenario, but we will print as people come in. This little scanner is kind of like a proximity reader, which we will be able to print either a QR code or a barcode and then scan it on this scanner that will be attached to the printer and actually print whoever's in front of them the city board precinct ballot for them. So these are some things that we are purchasing to help facilitate our transition to ballot on demand printing, as well as stay in compliance on a cyber related aspect of the Secretary of State's requirement. So this is, for early in-person voting, this is a bigger one, as well as you'll see at some point in the future, getting some tables and things like that in order to store all this new ballot on demand equipment that we have.
Right. Any other questions? Okay. Make a motion to approve those vouchers. Was there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any other questions? Ms. Walker, thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. I will also move to acknowledge receipt of Directive 2022-48, which describes the process for county party executive committees to submit to the SOS candidates for the Board of Election appointments for the full term beginning March 1st, 2023. It's a walk-on item. We just received it yesterday. And so we're going to walk it on, and it's something that we see every 2 years. If there's a second.
Second.
If there's any question or comment, hearing none, all those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. And on to our personnel agenda, we have set forth here some more good news for county employees.
Yes.
This has been set forth in the agenda, a 3% COLA versus the 2% recommended. I think when we were here last time, there was also a 6% across the board increase too. That's one of the recommendations. Then we have other recommendations for appointment to the program coordinator in the ballot department, election ballot department, and the registration department. A transfer of Mr. Michael Canavino in that regard, Mr. Michael Babinski in regard to an election official one ballot department, and Alana Marinek for program coordinator ballot department. Mr. Colati, you have sent a summary to this board in regards to those changes and the reasons for that and the process undercome. Is there any need to go in executive session? Any board members want to do that? Okay, for discussion. All right. Is there any? I will move to approve the personnel agenda. If there's a second.
Second.
Okay, there are questions or comments for Mr. Colati. Okay, and I just preface my remark before we take a vote that we've had a chance. You give us a summary about the provided explanation of how staff has come to these appointments and decisions to reorganize your EPB function. And I'm in support of all that. So having said that, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All right, motion passes unanimously. And on to board capital improvements update, Mr. Colati.
Sure. Wanted to give a brief update focusing on some of the capital projects that we have going, either currently going on or things that we're dealing with here at the Board of Elections. I'm going to start off with the Haley building. The main item that we are working on at the Hallie building is the elevator situation that we have at that building. And trying to get elevator repair and modernization of what we have. So the Hallie warehouse currently has 4 elevators. And the Board of Elections currently uses 3 of those 4 elevators. And that is the passenger elevator. So when you go, that's the elevator that you get in to go up to the 2nd floor. And then we have a large freight elevator, which is kind of the workhorse over there regarding election equipment. And that's the bigger elevator that we use to get scanners down to the 1st floor to send out to the polls. And then on election night, supply bag carts and all those coming into that large freight elevator to get them up to 2. And then we have a middle freight elevator, which is probably 1/3 of the size of the large freight elevator. And that's elevator is probably utilized more so to outside of election night to get vote by mail materials from the 5th floor to the 2nd floor and vice versa. So ballots up on 5 and then get them down to the 2 to tabulate. And then on election night, we use sometimes that middle freight to take things from the 2nd floor. They come up on the large, a lot of things get processed there. And then sometimes we have an operation up on 5. So then we take that to go up. The building, those elevators are probably original to the building. And that building is not a young building. So the passenger elevator is probably the elevator that works the best. But it does need some modernization in that, like the button panel and some of the mechanicals that go behind that, those need updated. But that is the elevator that we know works best and we can count on the most. Although why it's important to get people up and down, that's not necessarily a good elevator to try to get equipment up and down. So that's why we have these freight elevators. The large freight elevator, it currently works at the most basic level, and I'll explain a little bit about that. And it does have periodic breakdowns. When I say it works at the most basic level, is that if someone is in that elevator, they can operate it and they can get it from one floor to the next. However, things such as calling the elevator. So if the elevator is on 5 and you're on the 2nd floor, you can't hit you can hit the button to have it come to 2, but it won't go anywhere. Someone physically has to go up, get on the elevator on 5, and bring it down to where it needs to go. So you can't, and sometimes you don't know where the elevator is, so you're guessing. All right, we'll go to 3, go to 4, see if you can find the elevator and that. So that's one thing. Another thing is the self-leveling function of it. So when the elevator stops at the floor, typically, right, it matches up with the floor you go down to, so you can just walk out. That doesn't work. So the staff is eyeballing it and they get pretty good on trying to stop it. If they're not quite right, if it's off by 4 inches, close up the doors, try to bring it down a little bit and do those things. And then just the doors themselves. If you've seen it, those are heavy, big, bulky doors. Typically, you would be able to press a button and they would open and close. That doesn't work. So that's somebody using their back to open it. And there's the exterior doors, and then there's the interior gate that exists on a freight elevator. None of that is automatic, but we make it work. And staff does what they can. When it breaks down, it's of an age where they don't really manufacture parts, so they try to do workarounds. And sometimes a elevator repair company is able to kind of manufacture or rig something up in the shop to keep it going. So we're getting by with that, but that needs to be replaced. The middle freight, that elevator is out of commission. So it expired a couple weeks before election day, and there's at the bottom there's a pit and there's water in it. It's fried out, and it's fried out the electrics. They can't replace it at this point or fix it, so it needs replaced. So we don't have that currently available. Now, the county leases that building. So we have a landlord. That landlord is Greystone. And we've had meetings. We've had meetings for a while, but now they're actually starting to take these meetings more seriously between us and other tenants of the building, like the prosecutor's office and the archives, with County Public Works, who is a representative and the leaseholder, and then Greystone, who is leasing it to us, that we need to come up with some fixes here. So where we're currently at is that middle freight, which is not functional, looks like that will need to be replaced. Or that's where they're gonna focus on it, is getting that actually replaced. Now, the caveat to that is they want that elevator to be able to go to the basement up to the 6th floor, 6 floors of the building. For an elevator to go to the basement, you have to, or any end of the elevator, you have a safety pit that's underneath that elevator. So if things were to let loose, you have these mechanisms to keep everyone alive who's in that elevator car. There's certain depths and requirements. They've done some initial testing underneath this middle freight in the basement to ensure that they can get the proper depth of a pit to have that elevator go to that level, go to the basement. You're obviously using today's building codes, which are different than older's, means that the pit needs to be deeper. In their preliminary review, the water table underneath this pit is too high and they can't dig the pit as deep as they need to go to make it stop in the basement. However, the elevator should go to the basement. So what they're currently looking at with engineers is there is enough headroom where potentially they can build a platform. So the elevator will come to the basement. It won't necessarily go to the ground. It'll go to this platform that will be higher. So between the platform and how far they can deep, you would hopefully be able to get the appropriate depth to have the safety measures in place. So they're working on that now with engineers to see if it's possible. Hopefully, we'll have an answer at the beginning of January. And then if that's successful, then the landlord and Public Works will work on elevator replacement of that middle freight first. So getting that functional. It takes anywhere from 8 months to 12 months to do what they need to do on one elevator. Take out the car, get new infrastructure, all that work. So we won't have that elevator probably for the majority of 2023. So we're gonna have to rely on this large freight elevator, which again is questionable. Once this middle freight is replaced, then they will take the large freight out of commission and get that modernized so it does what it needs to do. Going into 2024, I think we will only have one functioning freight elevator, which is not ideal. Talking with the county about, well, what are some other alternatives we can do? And there's some space on the first floor that maybe we don't currently occupy that we could maybe get into. It's not a great solution, but again, trying to be solution minded and how we can do some of this and try to figure that out. So we have these things going on with the elevators. The elevators are the first priority for Hallie, and there's movement on that to try to get that fixed.
Just one question
Sure.
on that before you move beyond
Mhm.
Hallie. I mean, it seems to me that there ought to be a priority, though, to address the safety issue regarding the leveling issue. Maybe we'll wait for somebody to injure themselves over there before they fix it. I mean, it just seems to me that I get that
Yeah,
there's a lot of detail and
Yeah.
issues around how to fix the other freight elevators, but it just seems to me they've been put on notice. The landlord's been put on notice about the potential safety hazards and risks there. That's, yes,
yes.
yeah, I mean,
Oh, yeah.
this just seems to me that,
So document,
Something's
I mean,
gotta
you have
happen.
emails and notifications to them. I mean, it says, hey, putting you on notice. Secondly, and I think this should be a cheap fix, Terry and I and others have unloaded and put on carts. Can we level that cement down there? It is all pitted. Nothing is flat. I mean, it's very difficult to push, but I think it would be an easy fix just to layer over there. You're not talking about there, right? So if you could have them look at
Yeah,
that, I mean,
we
I think that's a cheap, easy fix, but.
Probably would have ran over that.
Right, the memory stick, and these carts will maybe last a little longer too, because they just don't bounce around.
So, yeah.
Right,
we
Peter?
have to look at that.
Peter.
Yeah, So we're doing, like I said, we've been complaining about these elevators for some time. Brian and Vic and their teams are, so finally,
We've ridden out of, I mean, it's old
Yeah.
stuff.
but wasn't there, I mean, I'm a little concerned that we may not have a fix in time for the 2024 election. So there was some discussion around at one point, and I'm not suggesting this is the solution, but moving our operation. And I know
we'll get to that in this
Oh,
conversation.
okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Okay,
no, no,
I
no.
just-
Yeah,
I mean, it just doesn't, to me, if we know now that we aren't gonna have working operators, I'm sorry, elevators for 2024, I just don't, it just, I'm already having got nightmares starting tonight. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. So maybe you guys
yeah,
are thinking through that, okay.
yeah.
I have a question.
Sure.
You mentioned 4 elevators.
Mhm, yes.
So,
So there's a small freight elevator. It's similar in size probably to the middle freight. It's on the northern part of the building. And the elevator does stop on the second floor, so we can utilize that one. We would have that. On the 5th floor, it stops on the 5th floor, but it stops on the north half of the floor. So the 5th floor divided in half, south side, Board of Elections, north side, archives. So it goes into the archives area. So we would, and we could make this work somehow. We would, right now, for security purposes, blocked off, cut a hole in the wall, put a double door, and try to make sure we had pathway to get back and forth. So that elevator works the best. That's the one that they modernized the first, and the one that is least conducive for us, but like we always do, we make things work and we do that workaround. The other big thing at Halley is the roof on the Perkins garage. So when you come over there, you're going in that elevator, and that's kind of like the main body of the Halley building. But west of it, attached to it, is the Perkins garage, where it's something where you never really go into. There's a garage door off of Perkins Avenue, but we have this, it's a single floor, there's nothing above it, above this part of it. That's where Vic and his team store all of the election day supplies, pens, flags, all that, as well as we have long-term storage there for materials. A lot of things are palleted and shelving in a secure area, as well as we just have we do prep work to get ready for election day. That roof is leaking. And they came out probably a year or two ago, and they did what I would call a Band-Aid job to get it watertight, which didn't have Band-Aid just let loose. The landlord went out, got a bid, got a contractor to come in and replace the roof, which needs to happen, because I think what they did is, as they did the Band-Aid, they didn't lift up any of the mechanical roof units, so heating, cooling, all those things. So I think that, water will find the path that it needs to get in somewhere, and that's what it was. So now they're actually going to fix it correctly. We were all ready to go in September, a week before. Landlord, contractor, whatever, didn't pull the correct permits, so they couldn't start the job. So then for them to do all that wasn't time. So now that has gone on hold. Everything is there, and that will happen in the spring when the weather is conducive, and they're allowed to do that type of work.
Who's the landlord again?
Greystone. So, but we're able to work around. There are a couple spots where there might be some dripping water. We don't put anything there. We have plastic up. But so those are the main things we're looking at Halley. Then this building here, in the Hughes building, we have few things going on. As of right now, as we speak, on the 3rd floor, that's where our IT server room is. So where all the brains of the operations are. The cooling unit, so that has its own separate AC unit. Those servers, computer servers, draw a lot of heat. So, and those AC units need to run year round, dead of winter, whatever it is, to keep those things cool. That unit was past its prime. And probably about 2 years ago, it's a cooling unit in the ceiling, it died. So we've been working with portable units that Public Works has in to keep the room cool as best they can. So 2 years ago, when it really did die, they worked on getting a replacement unit, and they actually did put forward the order for the replacement unit. Took a lot longer for them to manufacture it and get it here, and this unit finally arrived to the warehouse where they have it in December. And so right now, we actually are getting that installed. So they started this past Monday, Public Works, they came in, took the whole unit out, they ripped out the ceiling. Today, the unit should be delivered on site. Pipe fitters installing it, and hopefully by the end of the year, they'll have it installed, and we'll actually have a proper cooling unit that will work correctly and new ductwork and everything, so we will be in a good position there. And that should last for many, many years into the future. So we're happy to get that going. Then a standby generator. We have been lobbying for this for a long time. The county has agreed to put one in. Steve had mentioned we had the generator kick in for early in-person voting. We rent. You may see them sometimes when you come for a meeting, tow behind units that we put in there. And so we do that. Depending on the size of the election, we'll get it for about a week before election day. And in a bigger election, we'll get it for the whole month of early in-person voting to help with that. But we definitely need power beyond election cycles, as we do a lot of different work here too. So the county has agreed to this, a permanent generator in the parking lot, a big unit. It's about $500,000. However, again, it seems like these things are built to order, and with part issues, the order has been put in, but there is a 65-week lead time on having the unit manufactured. So we are closer to the commencement of that 65-week window, which means that we should have this unit installed in the summer of 24, which will be helpful for the general election. But in the meantime, we will continue on with our what we do to make things work. I'm thankful that we finally were able to convince them that this building needs constant power sources all the time. And when it does come, it'll take up 2 to 4 parking spots in the parking lot, which parking's tight as it is. We'll talk about that a little bit. So we have that going on. And then we have in this building just the overall general building rehab. We have the carpeting that will happen, but before that, the county will come in, and this should all happen in 23. Update, modernize, rehab the bathrooms and all the floors, so make those modern. The kitchenette areas and break rooms for staff, get those improved. And then also doing some space modifications. This will primarily happen on floors 2 through 4. So this place is all chopped up. So ripping down some of these walls and maybe reconstructing some of them and having it so we can group departments together, have better storage spaces, and do all of these things. Public Works, again, they oversee this. They went out and they hired an outside architecture firm. It is, I think it's Makovich and Pusti out of Berea, and they will be putting together the plans and kind of overseeing all the development of this, along with the county project coordinator. A portion of the work may be done by county public works, but then a portion of it will be bid out for a contractor to come in and do all of that. Depending on the floor, there'll be different things that will happen. Some of them, like for example, on the 3rd floor, as they rip out this gigantic counter that we don't use and open the space, we'll get that open, but then also they will procure cubicles and make that efficient, the space more efficient, things like that. So that's a big project that will go on. Tony and I will work with the county to oversee that along with Sean Keita to make it work.
If you would, and just, I know there's a hard stop at 11, and we got, if you would, if this is very helpful, kind of prepare a summary,
Sure.
what you just talked about,
And I do have some of that.
line by line, and the warehouse, the elevators,
Sure.
what we're doing here.
Yeah.
And then some, expected completion dates.
That part,
Just so
we'll try, those will be guesses. And just one last thing I want to hit on, and this is Diana Joe's thing, is so elevators at Hallie, parking at this building, parking is not good. When we have these big crowds and parking is shrinking, what we have available to us. We brought that to the attention of Mike Bever, Director of Public Works. We had an initial meeting, and he's like, well, we can try to do some things for parking, but can't do a whole heck of a lot. So he said, we need to find a different building. So he wants to find something where the goal is, if we could all move into one building, that would be option 1. Option 2 is, if they can't find a space that's correct, then it would be get a space that's big enough to house early in-person voting, ample parking, and take the 2 operations that are clearly Hallie, that are very elevator reliant, election support and ballot, and put them in this space also. Single level, no elevator, so you're not monkeying with that. Then potentially us, poll worker department, registration, and that, we would exit here and they would rehab Hallie and make that into office space, like on the 2nd floor, where we used a passenger elevator, empty this building and have it so it could be sold. And then the proceeds from this would go to offset the purchase and procurement of a new building that would house early in-person voting and our ballot and election support functions. Hopefully, we can all come together, but do what we
Well,
can.
they looked at that 3 or 4 years ago, I recall, and then they rehabbed the warehouse and fixed it up. But thank you,
Yeah.
that should be part of that, and obviously there would be a group of people from staff as well as maybe a couple of board members that would participate in that whole process if they get serious about it.
Yeah, so we'll see how serious they get.
Well, they
So-
should get, I mean, the fact that we won't have capacity with the freight elevators for the presidential election ought to be enough incentive to really get folks looking at this seriously. So,
So,
I mean, it will impede our operation and interfere with our operation to the extent that should be the driver to get people motivated to really kind of move this forward as best. I mean, obviously it depends on what's available, but there should be a real in earnest look at this because this is concerning.
definitely, and we have a meeting tomorrow afternoon with them, a second meeting that they call it, and they've already, Public Works has invited in the administration of county council. They're like, okay, we need to start like
Oh, good.
getting council members educated on what's going on.
That's encouraging.
So I think there might be, we'll see, but there should be maybe some
I
traction.
mean,
for
really,
this.
I mean, this impacts our operation, so.
Let's pick a meeting date. You
Yes.
suggested the 22nd. Is that the date that, I understand you're gonna be out of
Yeah,
town
yeah,
regardless
sorry,
of what we do, which is fine, but is that the date you're gonna suggest?
Let me interject, since I'm the only one that'll be here. I've got an appointment at 10:45.
Okay, so
So, I mean, you have.
I will say, so Brian is making great progress on the recount. We're hopeful that at some point on Monday of next week, maybe Tuesday, he would actually be able to hand off a finalized report, proofed and good to us. So the 22nd, I think is definitely a safe date. If we had to go to Wednesday, the 21st, I think we would probably be able to make that work. And regarding the length of the meeting, at this point, the only thing I would anticipate is actually a certification of the recount. It could be 10 minutes or less, maybe if another directive, we would acknowledge it, but we're like not trying to build a big thing for it. All that to mean that if we wanted to do it earlier in the morning, if that was available, it would be quick.
Yeah, that would probably be a little safer.
All right, 9 o'clock then on the 22nd. And we'll accommodate you, Terry. We'll get through that certification. So 9 o'clock, that's the safe date. I mean, no reason to give it the 21st and find out you can't make it for whatever reason. All right, and we'll talk if there are any of the walk-on items or agenda items, okay?
Yeah,
Okay, we'll talk. And then finally, I know we all received a letter from ES&S about product. Why don't you, at some point, there's some time to this, but, let the board know what your thoughts are
Sure.
about how staff intends to proceed,
sure.
either giving them back the product or, I know we've talked about it. in general, so we'll have to talk about it now, but at some point, you'll let us know.
Yes.
Is there any other new business or old business that needs to be discussed today? Okay, then I will move to, we in recess still or no? We're going to adjourn. The election's over. It isn't over.
Well, no, we have a
It's
recount.
So,
Yeah.
So I think we would probably recess,
Recess.
and then our next meeting, we could probably.
all right, I'll move to recess if there's a second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful week. We'll see you next week.
Thanks for accommodating.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Thanks for accommodating.